The Russian war economy is burning through money, metal, and men, and it's also running out of time. You see, the Kremlin says it could continue to fight for decades, but the ledgers, the actual numbers, they say something different. The budget reality is quite a bit different from how Russia would like you to see it. The fact is that in the first half of 2025, the deficit was about $37 billion. Oil and gas revenue fell by about 17% year over year. And that's all the while war spending climbed to north of 7% of GDP. Planned military outlays for 2025 are about $155 billion. But that's sort of hard to pay off if you already have massive deficits. So to plug the hole, the regime is leaning on reserves. It's taking out money anywhere it can from the private sector. But this is sort of not addressing a core problem. Now, Moscow rarely admits to its core problems, but here's one. Around 40 to 45% of the economy rides on gas and coal. When those revenues fall, the entire model begins to buckle. And now oil and gas are beginning to tank. My name is Jason Smart here in Kiev, Ukraine, and I'm a special correspondent for the Kiev Post. As you know, I have worked as a national security advisor for many years and specifically study Russia and the Putin regime. And what we're seeing inside of Russia is a disaster that just gets worse by the day. It is a burning dumpster fire. But this regime cannot get out of it. This is a mess that they have no idea how to escape from. And the reason is very simple. Because they are not looking for solutions. They are too busy engaging in things like persecuting each other. The FSB is busy trying to arrest military leaders. Military leaders are trying to escape blame for this disastrous war. And Vladimir Putin, he's busy on vacation. He just isn't around. The entire situation in Russia is laughable. But in fact, it's tragic because it's created a war that could end, but nobody there is competent enough to control the situation. And if it continues like this, the Putin regime is truly dangling on a precipice from collapse. Which is why I created this channel. Because despite the fact that things are so bad in Russia, very rarely do we hear it in the Western press. Very rarely do we hear the truth of what is happening here on the ground in Ukraine or next door in Russia. So I ask you to please help me get the truth to more people. Help me to engage others so they know that Ukraine is fighting. Ukraine can win. And it's Russia that is truly just 2 steps away from total disaster. You can do that by subscribing to this channel, liking this video, and leaving your comments below. You could also consider becoming a channel member today. So let's look at what Russia is doing. So Russia has this pillow that sort of slows down its crash. It's called the National Wealth Fund. It pulls money out of it all the time. Now, it advertises that it has $131 billion. You would think, well, that's fine. They could cover their debts and continue going with that. But it really can't. What Russia often doesn't mention, that is only a portion of that is liquid. Only a portion of that can be used on short notice. So each budget revision, that's shifting more of the resources away from the society and to the war. But this is an economy that's under great stress. The key interest rate is 18%, and that's because inflation is persistent. The ruble needs defending. Now, this is down from the 21% it was before, but it's still too low. Due to political decisions, Vladimir Putin wanted to make the population feel that things were getting better, they lowered the interest rates. But that actually hasn't helped anything. Things are actually just gotten worse, because that, in fact, makes the inflation worse. Now, the high interest rates, they choke credit. First, where production is, but then it also chokes out mortgages, working capital loans. And just consider how bad it's become for corporations inside of Russia. Corporate lending was nearly zero in January and February 2025 because conditions were tightening. Less fresh cash for mines, for mills, for suppliers means more delayed maintenance, fewer upgrades, slower replenishment cycles. Now, it's very important to know that for Russia, coal is the first industrial domino. And that's why when people understand what's going on in Russia, what's really happening, that we don't need to see all the official numbers, which are usually fudged, look at what is happening in Kuzbass. The Kunetsk Basin is in Kemerovo Oblast. It is Russia's core coal region and the main source of that coking coal. When the Kuzbass is slowing down, that means the Russian economy is slowing down. Because when the Kuzbass slows, furnaces run colder. Rail wagons move less ore, and they move less fuel. And all of this means less regional tax receipts. Less regional tax receipts means the conditions at the local level get worse. So how are things doing these days in Kuzbass? So overall, the Ministry of Energy, it admits that 51 coal enterprises are shut or on the edge. In Kuzbass alone, 17 companies have stopped work. Some have been mothballed and some are idle, and some have gone bankrupt. Fewer coal trains into coke ovens means less hot metal into steel mills, which means tightening of the entire supply chain that feeds artillery shells, armor plating, rails, and refinery repairs. But that's not the only metal that's important in Russia. Steel, we could say, is the backbone of a war of attrition, and it is the direct output of those very blast furnaces. So world steel data shows that Russia's produced about 5.7 million tons of steel in July 2025. That's 6.3 million less year over year. Across the entire CIS, the Commonwealth of Independent States, the countries that made up the former Soviet Union, many of whom still work together and have mills that they share, it is down almost 5% year over year. So when we see down across the entire region, that's probably a good sign that things are about to get even worse within Russia. Let's look at some of the major companies in Russia. How are they handling this? MMK is one of Russia's flagship producers. It reported negative free cash flow in Q2. Negative cash flow forces deferred maintenance. It means squeezed wages. It means unsafe shortcuts. And each one of these is a decision. And it is a decision that will ultimately kill output. Let's look at something else in a related industry. How about piping? How about fittings? How about refineries? Great question. Pipes and industrial fittings are the arteries of Russia's gas, oil, and chemical plants. They need them all the time. They need the large diameter ones to carry crude and gas across thousands of kilometers, hundreds of miles, in order to keep the economy running. Without them, there's nothing there. Now, the major pipe makers have posted losses in 2024. They entered 2025 very weak, very few orders, and high borrowing cost. But even more important, logistics were breaking them down. So what does that mean? It means that when the pipes and the fittings stall, repairs to pipelines, refineries, they all slip, which cuts into the revenues. And the state really needs those revenues to finance their war. But it's not just those that are in major heavy industry. Let's look at a different industry totally. Let's look at construction. Construction is the domestic demand engine. It is exactly what keeps the cement, the steel, and these other sort of industries running between their defense orders. But after Moscow rolled back its mass mortgage subsidies, new building sales slumped, 18% down. Now, agencies across Russia are warning of a looming housing shortage. That's amazing considering the fact that they were growing so fast right before the war. But this is what happens when you start a war. It has unintended consequences. So overall, the Russian economy is having serious problems. And we're seeing that reflected across many different things. Consider this. Roscosmos, its design bureau, Sipon project, it filed for bankruptcy after months of unpaid wages. The leadership is in total chaos. What does this mean? Well, Roscosmos is the Russian space agency. Space and missile programs share software, machine tools, engineers with things like air defense, strike systems. So when we see a break on one of those, it has an effect on the rest. All these things tie together. It's not like Roscosmos just disappears and the others with whom it was working to do things like air defense won't notice it. Oh, trust me, they will feel this. All these things work together. Oil and gas are the very lifeblood for the Russian economy. Yet the home cash, that's also important, and it is shrinking. So consider this. First half of oil and gas revenues fell by roughly 17% year over year. That's a pretty sharp drop. But with the new sanctions that are coming, the ones that are expected to come against India and China, that are the largest buyers of Russian oil and gas, that would absolutely destroy the Russian oil and gas industry. If that were to happen, what would it mean? Well, it would mean that all the associated industries would also be affected. That would definitely affect things like the pipe manufacturers, the fitters, because who needs these large pipes to go across Russia if nobody is buying your oil? Who's going to need that if nobody's buying your gas? The entire Russian economy is incredibly interconnected because it's very simple. They never produced a lot. They have very few things that were developed post-Soviet Union. They never developed a strong independent economy. And that's why when just one part of it starts to break, the rest of it starts to break with it. They don't have a lot of options. Russia is itself getting further and further in the hole. It has no easy way out. And though there is virtually no unemployment in Russia, it's about 2.2%. That's not a good sign. Despite what you might think, that is a very bad sign, because that means that there is such high inflation that nobody is without a job. And somehow about half of Russians are searching for a second job, which means that their money isn't buying them nearly enough anymore. The regime that has this sort of a problem, it can't survive forever. It has a big problem. And so ultimately, when we think about it this way, that in wars of attrition, capacity is destiny. But Russia's capacity is shrinking. It's not growing. And time is working against a machine that burns input faster than it replaces them. Ukraine, though, is in a different situation. Ukraine and its allies should keep pressure on energy logistics, metallurgical inputs, and financing channels. That is how we can fight Russia economically. That is how we wage war against Russia's economy. So despite what people say, Russia is not doing so well. Russia is doing very not well. The key at this point is to make sure that we make it even worse. Thank you for watching. Please like this video, subscribe to this channel, and consider becoming a channel member. And leave your comments below. I'm very keen to hear what you think as well. As always, thank you for supporting Ukraine.